I understand at your house you have a party of 150, 160 people coming?
Something like that, but it's by invitation only.
Oh, that's why I didn't get it.
Yes, yes.
You're not funny, dude. And Cal Gajraj with us tonight. How's everything in your world, Cal?
Fantastic.
Yeah, great. We're going to have a very interesting conversation about Townview Baptist Church and what went on with the Southern Baptist Convention.
And Gay Captain America.
And Gay Captain America.
What more do you want?
Yeah. It's going to be a good show.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Well, welcome to Queer News Tonight, the world's first and only LGBTQ daily evening news. It's time to queer up the news. It's 7 p.m. Tuesday, March 16th, and we are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we're going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight.
The world's first live daily queer evening news show. Out of the closet and into the headlines on Q News Tonight.
Thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. This is the world's first and only unedited live LGBTQ evening news show. Whatever happens, you will see it.
This evening, we bring you the news and perspective representing the LGBTQ community from South Florida, America, and across our planet.
I'm your anchor at Queer News Tonight, Al Ferguson, and tonight we welcome anchor Tony Lima. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Ariana's Center, Trans Latina Florida, that engages, empowers, and lifts up the trans community as the only direct service and advocacy organization based here in South Florida, led by a trans Latina openly living with HIV. He is also a longtime South Florida LGBTQ activist, advocate, and political operative, as well as a seasoned communicator, marketer, and fundraiser. Good evening, Tony.
Hey, Al. I'm excited about today's show, especially because we're talking about the legislative process, as we usually do during our news. And today we just finished having our historic second Transgender Lobby Day in Tallahassee.
Oh.
Virtual this year, but a strong lobby day nonetheless.
Oh, excellent. Well, next up, please welcome anchor Cal Gajraj. He is an award-winning international marketing and public relations consultant, helping both nonprofit and for-profit organizations with multifaceted executive management in branding, publicity, and fundraising, including local and global initiatives. His expertise is in growing a brand, creating an e-commerce consumer journey, and launching innovative projects that boost efficiency, expand productivity, and increase revenue growth. And gosh, you've got a great PR handler. Good evening, Cal.
Check out my website.
Okay. All right. Tonight we begin with the queer headlines. The LGBTQ community in South Florida and across America is diverse. Our community across the world is vast, and here are the bullet points of the queer news for today, Tuesday, March 16. We begin by queering up South Florida. The president of a South Florida Pride organization appears in a sexy new national TV commercial as rainbow flags fly. Watch this.
DJ Citizen Jane quit on her passion for music. She never would have left her career as a detective to pursue it. If she let starting at the bottom scare her, she never would have hustled to play bigger and bigger shows. And if she was content with being one of the best Latina artists in Miami, she wouldn't be electrifying the crowd in sold-out shows around the world. That's the fighting spirit. That's what makes a lion. Modelo, root for those with a fighting spirit.
Well, what happens when a major national beer brand reaches out to a world-class lesbian to sell the idea of that fighting spirit? That is exactly what Modelo did with South Florida's own DJ Citizen Jane. They launched this campaign this week, and there are several interesting reflections for the LGBTQ community. First, this is not a low-budget message. Even after production, Modelo is spending more than $5 million in national television advertising. That began this week. Second, as LGBTQ America already knows, DJ Citizen Jane is a frequent host at Happening Out Television Network and the founder of Hialeah Pride. Happening Out Television Network has done many stories about Hialeah being one of the most conservative cities in America and how Hialeah Pride faced an uphill battle to organize in this fiercely Cuban American community, all led by a lesbian. So when Modelo embraces DJ Citizen Jane in this national commercial at Queer News Tonight, we knew this was a big deal. Tomorrow, DJ Citizen Jane will be with us at Queer News Tonight, and it's Happening Out to discuss this significant moment in not only her career, but especially during pandemic, the messaging of fighting and not giving up, and the announcement of the return of Hialeah Pride, which is going to be on October 10th, 2021. We congratulate DJ Citizen Jane and don't miss this fascinating behind the scenes story.
I have a huge smile on my face right now because, of course, Maddie, or DJ Citizen Jane, is a Latina.
Right.
She's the founder of Hialeah Pride. And I love that she's the one starting off in these commercials because representation matters. And to have a queer person who's also a Latina out there is a really empowering thing. So thank you, Maddie. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Q News Tonight and joining you for It's Happening Out.
Right.
Congratulations, DJ Citizen Jane. This is amazing. And what a way to not only represent the LGBTQ community, but also putting South Florida on the map. So I think this is absolutely fantastic.
And you know what? Haters gonna hate because DJ Jane is getting ready to be seen in the neighborhood, I read in impressions from the Modelo campaign, between 300 and 500 million times from this ad. Already in the month of March, Advertising Age, which is the industry Bible for commercials, television commercials in the United States, says that DJ Jane's, Citizen Jane and Modelo's commercial is the sexiest commercial in America in the month of March.
Wow.
This is going to be a fantastic story. And oh, there's this little thing called Hialeah Pride.
Absolutely. With that, we queer up entertainment. Marvel to introduce gay Captain America later this year. This year, Marvel is celebrating the 80th anniversary of the first Avenger with a new limited series. Writer Christopher Catwell and artist Dale Eaglesham are teaming up for the United States of Captain America, a new limited series where Captain America's shield has been stolen and teams up with friends Sam, Bucky, John, and go on a cross-country road trip to find it. In their travels, they meet several heroes inspired to become local Captains America. The first issue of the United States of Captain America has a meeting the Captain America of the Railways, Aaron Fisher, who is gay. He's introduced in a bonus story written by writer Josh Trujillo and illustrated by Jan Bazaldua. Trujillo says, quote, Aaron is inspired by heroes of the queer community, activists, leaders, and everyday folks pushing for a better life, end quote. Bazaldua added, quote, I really enjoyed designing him, and as a transgender person, I am happy to be able to present an openly gay person who admires Captain America and fights against evil to help those who are almost invisible to society, end quote. Each issue will introduce a new local Captain America, showing off the diversity of the country and the people who step up to be heroes. Fisher's issue will be released June 2nd.
What an exciting story, especially for the amount of LGBTQ fans who are Marvel fans, who have watched every single movie, who have read all the comics, and now we're being represented on this platform.
When we were working on this story today in production, I turned to the guys, to the people that were in the room, and I said, my goodness, isn't this exciting news? And a 100% unanimous reaction was, yeah, okay. And I said, wait, this is not 2010, much less 1995. This is a big deal, I guess, for my age group, because this was unimaginable 10, 15, 30 years ago. I just think it's absolutely awesome. And for one of the comic writers to be trans is like the cherry on top.
Amazing is all I have to say. It's great because it's about time. right? This should have happened a long time ago. The Marvel fan base, the superhero fan base as a whole, has a lot of LGBTQ people in it. So it's time, as we always talk about, representation matters, that we see ourselves in these kind of storylines. So it's very exciting for me.
Yes.
And now it's time to Queer Up Equality Act. Glimpse of the opposition. Collins spells out demands for supporting LGBTQ plus Equality Act. Maine Senator Susan Collins, whose support for the Equality Act is seen as crucial to winning Republican votes for the LGBTQ non-discrimination bill, is breaking her silence on the proposed revisions she's demanding in exchange for her support. Annie Clark, a Collins spokesperson, laid out the proposed changes this week, identifying 3 general areas where Collins seeks changes. First, Collins wants to grant additional leeway for religious institutions to turn away LGBTQ people. Second, to allow changes to allow domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, and school sports teams to take sex into account when deciding to place transgender people in sex-segregated areas. Third, to change language pertaining to religious organizations and thinks that faith-based community partners like Catholic Charities should not be unfairly excluded from receiving federal funding. Collins believes transgender rights are a complex issue and needs further study. It's a dilemma. If supporters of the Equality Act were to accept the proposed changes, they'd be acquiescing to exemptions for anti-LGBTQ discrimination the bill was intended to address. On the other hand, without support from Collins, there's certainly no way to find the 60 votes needed in the Senate to overcome a legislative filibuster and advance the legislation unless the Democratic caucus can come to unanimity on scrapping the filibuster altogether.
Well, you know, Cal doesn't sugarcoat this story one bit, does he? We're at like 55 to 60 days now of the president's new administration, and some reality is setting in. One of his top goals is in the first 100 days, the Equality Act. That likely is not going to happen. The issue here is the conundrum. We can't get the Equality Act if we don't have Susan Collins, and then Susan Collins and others. We can't get to 60. We can't get the Equality Act if we don't acquiesce in the issues that would filter religious freedom exemptions that would mute some of the effects of the Equality Act. The conundrum, therefore, is we may not get the Equality Act, and that is beginning to reach in. It's one of the reasons why I'm really happy I'm just a country reporter here in South Florida and not an LGBTQ advocate like Tony and Cal, because you got your work cut out for you.
Hear, hear, brother. Listen, this is what happens all the time. Religion is used as a wedge, and it's used to discriminate. So like you said, Al, in muting the Equality Act with all of these religious exemptions, we still will have loads of discrimination. So this absolutely can't happen. That's why it's important to continue working at the state level to pass legislation that's protective of all of us, not only in the workplace, which is the main point of the Equality Act, but also in public services and public accommodations. Rights, really, that we should all be able to enjoy and that we all deserve.
And shame on these politicians for playing with people's lives. I mean, we're talking about homeless, you're talking about sex offenders, you're talking about, you know, everything in between, to people who need support, who need representation. And politicians are supposed to be put in place to help represent the people and not their own interest. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out.
You know, Tony and I are going to go to a bar after the show tonight. We're going to open a nice cold Modelo. We're going to toast DJ Jane and go, now we got to keep fighting, because that's exactly what Jane has done, because the Equality Act is literally in danger. Well, let's continue by queering up gay culture. Montreal's gay village will change its name to The Village to be more inclusive. In a move similar to Chicago's Boys Town, Montreal's famous gay village is getting a new name, and it has some locals angry and hurt. The queer enclave known worldwide will drop the word gay from the name in an effort to be more inclusive. Instead, the area's business owners say it will become, and this is the name, quote, The Village of Montreal, the largest SLGBTQ plus village in the world. That's its name. The group then had to explain the meaning behind the list of letters and numbers reminiscent of a license plate. 2S LGBTQ plus adds 2S for Two-Spirit and a plus sign at the end of the typical LGBTQ acronym for the community.
Two-Spirit is a modern pan-Indigenous term for a person who fills a social role in their cultures that's outside the gender binary. The move hasn't gone over well with some residents who have accused the group of erasing the area's long-standing association with the queer community in favor of a generic name that will encourage gentrification and more commercialization.
Leanne Miller-Lafleur, a Montreal Village Business Development Corporation board member, said, quote, "We're not discriminating against anyone that associates themselves with gay. It's for sure part of the community. We're just trying to include the rest of the people who don't feel that the word is associated with them. The word gay represented a lot of people that today may not still find themselves represented by that one term."
Journalist and activist Richard Burnett said, quote, "On the one hand, I understand why there's a push not to call it the gay village, because the word gay is now almost exclusively for gay men, and it's only one word in the LGBTQ acronym. But on the flip side, I fear that there's a dequeering of the gay movement. Spaces like the gay village are important, and we need to maintain them, and we need to support them. And by erasing its identity, it can be a very dangerous thing."
I agree with that quote. I think it's absolutely the dequeering of something that historically was meant to embrace the LGBTQ community as a whole. Why not use a word like the lavender community or village? Why not use the word queer? Something else if they wanted to keep it more open and more inclusive. But the reality is that that really long name, no one is ever going to use. And in just saying the village, you eliminate anything really queer or in any way inclusive from it.
It makes me think if they had like a focus group that sat around to be able to, you know, decide and talk about
Says
this
the
issue.
marketing expert.
Right.
This dude.
Visit my website. But anyway, I think that, you know, changing the name, I guess that, you know, I can see both sides of the coin, the inclusivity and then also the acceptance. You know, why does it have to be gay? You know, or why does it need to say gay? I mean, we'll see. I don't think it's going to stop people from visiting. I know they're trying to attract the area a little bit more to tourism, and maybe it'll help open up some more businesses and maybe it'll always be known as the gay district, and probably help a lot of other people come down and to visit and support.
You know, I'm really torn. First off, I have empathy for what the intent is. It's just like adding the brown, black, and the pink, blue, and white to the flag. There are people that feel like that they're not a part of our LGBTQ and plus community, and I understand that. I don't think we figured out how to do it yet. And I feel like in this story, for example, like what happened at Boys Town and other places, we're in a chess game, and it's a chess game where it's one move to see what happens for the next move to the next. And I hope that in the process of playing this chess game, we are going to get to the right end result that we all want, which is a feeling of inclusion, but not destroying our identity. We can't be the village in Montreal because we destroy the LGBTQ of the village, if that's how we broadly refer to it. And so at the sake of tourism or other related things, we are really in the long run harming our own community. So I hope we're playing the chess game in the right way, and we need that focus group to find out
I was just going to
what's
say
the best
that.
way to do it.
Cal was trying to plug business, but he's absolutely right. With a focus group, with some listening sessions, with what the community wanted, they could have probably come up with a better name.
Yeah.
And with that, we queer up trans rights. Mississippi governor signs first anti-transgender bill of 2021. Yesterday, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves signed into law a bill banning the state's transgender student athletes from participating in sports consistent with their gender identity. Senate Bill 2536 is one of many anti-trans measures advancing through the state legislatures across the country. This is the first to be signed into law this year. The new law requires public schools, colleges, and universities to designate its athletic teams or sports according to biological sex. It also bars government agencies, including accrediting and athletic associations, from taking adverse actions against public educational institutions that discriminate against trans student athletes. The law and others coming like it will likely be decided in the short term by the Biden administration and then appealed to the Supreme Court.
This is a tough story. I mean, it's a lot, you know, and the only thing, I mean, I applaud the trans community for wanting to be included, but maybe this is also an opportunity to create these sports teams and clubs and so on that are inclusive of the community and do it on their own. I think that, you know, we can't just sit around and wait for our politicians and our governments and our city officials to be able to create laws and legislatures to be able to support our lives. So I think that it's time for us to be able to create some of these opportunities on our own.
Just to draw attention to it, the key heart of this story and what's going on around the country is part of the special segment we're getting ready to do on religious freedom balanced against LGBTQ civil rights, because that's what's at play here. This is a religious institution versus a balance of rights issue. There's 108 approximately laws like this that are being considered around the United States in different states that are exactly like the first one that's been passed in Mississippi. What's going to happen next is the Biden administration is going to fight it. And the Biden administration is going to say that they are illegal and not enforceable. And then the state is going to file a suit against the Biden administration and go to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court is going to make a decision based on either your religious rights or civil rights, and to whatever conclusion that is going to be. It's a very complex problem. We need the Equality Act. The complication of the Equality Act story that we've already done is an indication that our honeymoon period is probably on the edge of coming to an end. And we're going to have to dig in and make the right choices and become very political. And our advocacy in the LGBTQ community and in all aspects of our community are really going to have to step up to protect especially the T's of our LGBTQ community.
We've talked about this on the show a lot, how the transgender community seems to be the wedge issue that's being used by conservatives in the wake of Biden winning the presidency. And we are seeing bills like this popping up everywhere. Just today, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Ariana Center, in partnership with Equality Florida, we had one of our LGBTQ lobby days today really focused on the trans community. And I can tell you that out of maybe 3 bills that are positive for the trans community as a whole, there were at least 7 that were meant to harm the trans community. And these are all political ploys. The sad part of all of this is that these legislators, these conservative legislators that are pushing for these laws, don't realize that these laws have real life impacts on people. People die when these laws are passed, especially our most marginalized, our trans women of color. So it's time to stop this ridiculousness and to see these bills for what they are. They're absolute hate. They're meant to confuse. They're meant to really just try to murk up the water for the rest of us. So it's time to open our eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Open our eyes. Well, that is our queer headlines for today. So let's catch up on the LGBTQ news surrounding COVID-19 with our special segment we call Quarantine Quickies. Queer News Tonight has been LGBTQ America's and South Florida's most important news source on the pandemic, as we have reported on coronavirus in every single news broadcast since January 6, 2020. Tonight, we report on the devastating effect that coronavirus is having on the American and worldwide LGBTQ community in total cases and deaths. We also try to provide some hope of a new light at the end of this long tunnel. As of tonight, more than 2,100,000 LGBTQ Americans have contracted COVID-19, and more than 38,366 LGBTQ Americans have died from coronavirus. It's a pause. As of today, more than 109,081,000 doses of the vaccine have been administered in the United States.
And now it's time to queer up quarantine quickies. President Biden posts video of guys making out on Instagram. An unusual video was posted by President Biden yesterday. The nearly 90-second video to his official Instagram marked a year of battling COVID in the US, but it's a 2-second clip toward the beginning of the spot that's getting the most attention. Just long enough to be noticeable, the emotional montage of life before and during the pandemic includes a sweet moment of 2 men kissing. Over in the comments section, folks celebrated the inclusion. One viewer wrote, quote, "Seeing the 2 men kiss in the beginning got me emotional," end quote.
Well, I have to say that quietly, this is gigantic in terms of news. I am not aware of a single time in history from a president, sitting president of the United States, embracement in their social media, that they pushed 2 men kissing intentionally, ever in history. I think this is the first time it has ever happened. And I love the fact that President Biden and the administration did it without even one mention. Even for the short moment that you see it, there was not a single mention of it, because they're trying, in my opinion, to tell the story of this is no big deal. This is just part of the life that we've experienced in the last year. Bravo to the President of the United States.
It also made me a little bit emotional. And it makes a greater point, like you were just saying, Al. It normalizes who we are as human beings, who we are as people. Representation, as we talk about all the time, matters. And this is a beautiful, beautiful example of that.
And how refreshing is it to now have an administration and a president who's the president of all people, you know, not just some people. So it's really nice to be, you know, for our community to be included in such a message that, you know, speaks to everyone.
You know, Cal, I puckered up there for just a moment because I thought when you started on how refreshing, you were going to say his name, you were going to say Baltimore's name, because I think there's a chance that we're going to get through this broadcast not mentioning Baltimore's name. That's super exciting.
I will not mention his name.
Yes, exactly.
Like I said,
that is our COVID-19 news for tonight. Next, we report that Happening Out Television Network is passionate about our support for the LGBTQ community. An example is Sunshine Cathedral. This is the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale, and we are broadcasting from our permanent set here at Sunshine in supporting that partnership. The network broadcasts the largest LGBTQ religious broadcast in the world, with more than 30,000 watching every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, and it's totally live. We encourage you to tune in. Our campaign of sponsorship proudly supports Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church. Watch this.
Hi, I'm Victor Diaz-Herman, Chief Executive Officer of Pridelines, and Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church.
We'd also like to thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living here in Fort Lauderdale, for making the set in this amazing queer church campus possible.
Finally, we thank Queer News Tonight's hotel sponsor, Best Western I-95 Fort Lauderdale. This is the closest and best choice to the famous Wilton Drive, and our hosts and guests stay at this LGBTQ ally partner. We encourage you to stay here when visiting South Florida.
Welcome to Q's Q&A on LGBTQ health and pandemic. For nearly a year, this segment has been unique in America, answering your LGBTQ community questions about our unique health needs. We are proud to have Queer News Tonight health anchor, Dr. Howard Grossman.
He's an American pioneer in HIV/AIDS medical treatment and was the executive director of the American Academy of HIV Medicine. He is a nationally recognized medical expert and proud member of our LGBTQ community. Good evening, Dr. Grossman.
Well, before we move into this week's questions, Howard, I want to give you the opportunity to begin with your thoughts over this week's health news for our community.
Well, before I do the health news, it's always health, but I mean, I have to give a shout out to that other evil person in our government in Florida, Marco Rubio, who's gotten into a war with Amazon today over their pulling the scientifically inaccurate, religiously bigoted fake news about LGBT people off of their website, that they won't sell any books that call LGBTQ people mentally ill.
Yeah.
And, I think that is amazing. And I wrote him a nice note, little Marco, telling him what a despicable person I thought he was and why he should be focused instead on the fact that Florida is one of the hardest hit states with COVID-19, not to mention all the other problems in this state.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but I think good news this week has been the continuing ramping up of vaccines. Several states now allow vaccines for people as young as 16. In most states, it's down to either 55 or 60. People with underlying health conditions, firefighters, teachers, people at high risk. And that's a great sign. And the fact that we're well over 2 million vaccinations a day, just shows you what an administration that actually governs can do.
Howard, before we move into the individual questions, I wanted to ask you quickly your comment. I have somebody that is working in a location that is distributing vaccine from a pharmacy in a business, so you can pretty quickly figure out at least the kind of business it is. They have been pretty aggressive in their organizational program in terms of having people come in to vaccinate. The person reports that approximately 20% a day are no-showing for their vaccine appointment, and they've placed people to call the day ahead to reconfirm. And what they're finding out in terms of their large cancellation percentage is because so many people are making appointments, and they have appointments at multiple locations, and then they're finding out, well, I've canceled my appointment that I'm going to have with you tomorrow because I had my vaccine 5 days ago someplace else, and there were multiple appointments like that. Have you heard many anecdotal stories like that?
I've heard of people trying to make appointments multiple places. I haven't heard people being too successful. I've heard of people registering at multiple places and then getting calls to say, oh, you came up, and then they have to say, no, I already got it. I know certainly here in Florida, there's one central registration number for everybody. So I'm not sure how that happens.
Yeah.
But people are desperate, and they are calling all over the place. I'm sure it must happen in some places.
Yeah. And also I've heard some comments that much of the vaccine response is going to be like toilet paper last March, or mask or sanitizer. We're going to get to a critical mass of the vaccine, and this pressure that we currently are watching is going to ease, like what we saw even with simple mask and sanitizer. Do you agree with that?
I think so, but it takes the ramping up of production. Whether it's here or around the world. And last week at the retrovirus conference, the big AIDS conference and coronavirus conference that took place, there was a petition that went out at the end of the conference that's online now, demanding that there be a world response to production of vaccine, that the companies, all of the companies that are making vaccine received huge amounts of government money to do it, and that they shouldn't be making a profit on it, and that their technology should be licensed around the world so that every country can set its factories to producing vaccine. Because right now it's predicted that only 3% of the population in many of the world's countries will be vaccinated by the end of 2021. And by the end of 2022, they expect maybe 30%. Which in no way will end this epidemic. So unless, what's starting to happen here, which is that companies are working together, like Merck and Johnson & Johnson, and factories are being repurposed to produce vaccine, unless that happens on a worldwide scale, we're not going to be able to beat this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's jump into our questions for tonight. We're going to start with Tony.
Hi, Dr. Grossman. Many members of the Black community are facing challenges getting the vaccine. While a new survey shows 40% of Republicans refuse to get it, how will these unvaccinated numbers affect us all?
Well, I think, the Black community certainly needs to have better access. And I think that's one of the things you keep hearing from the Biden administration, that Detroit, for example, a majority Black city is one of those places where you can get the vaccine if you're 16 years and older because of federal government intervention, because the federal government is setting up these giant FEMA vaccination centers. And I think that there's a real commitment from the Biden administration that we've heard to set up these centers in places, communities of color, Native American reservations, places where people don't have good access to the vaccine. So hopefully that will turn around. We have heard lots of stories about the African American community is reluctant to get vaccines. That is not the experience of a lot of people, although I will say I think there is more suspicion in that community or those communities than perhaps among older white people because of past experience with healthcare. And so it's really been important to reassure. But I think that at this point, you're seeing a change in the African American community, more people looking to get vaccinated. Republicans are a whole other story. I think this is the same
Aren't they
sort
always?
of ridiculousness. Yeah, the same sort of anti-science, head in the ground, follow Trumpelstiltskin to the grave sort of mentality that we've seen for so long. Sorry, I mentioned the name.
Yeah.
If you say it 3 times, it goes up in smoke.
You broke our day challenge. All right. I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
I know. I think it really puts so many of us at risk. And truthfully, I think we are going to get to a point where there is a certain vaccine apartheid. If you've been vaccinated, you get access to travel, you get access to, I think we're going to see a surge of infections in these Republican states that have opened wide open without any restrictions. And then, look, you're already seeing new shutdowns in Europe because of some of these resistant strains. I think those vaccinated people are going to be the people who are spreading the more resistant strains. And so they're going to, get a vaccine, or you don't want one, fine, stay at home. Same that we do with things like measles vaccine for kids. You want your kids to go to school, they need a vaccine. You don't want to give a vaccine, homeschool them.
Yeah.
Stay away from the people who are responsible.
All right. And next question, Cal.
What are long-haul COVID-19 patients, and what does the vaccine help them?
Well, long-haul COVID-19 patient is a patient who still experiences lots of symptoms long after having gotten over the acute infection. So they're past the shortness of breath, hospitalization kind of stage, but they still have, constant headaches, body aches, severe fatigue, some shortness of breath. That people are experiencing lung damage, they're experiencing other things. That COVID fog that people talk about, people have it months afterwards. For those people, there really hasn't been much that can be offered. There is some promising data, I think. I was just reading this morning that the COVID vaccine may actually help them develop a better immune response and may be helpful for those long haulers, but we just don't know the answer so far. It's clear that this virus sets off immunological attacks on the body that aren't simple.
Yeah.
Got it.
And Tony, our final question.
Are you worried about spring break and COVID-19 numbers?
Yeah, who goes on spring break? Young people. Who's not been vaccinated? Young people. Here they come to Florida. Florida and Miami especially is the epicenter of these new strains of viruses. We have more of them here than anywhere else in the U.S. And now you're bringing in all these kids from all over the country who are going to take this and spread it, wherever they go home to. They're certainly not social distancing. They're not wearing masks. They're completely ignoring. You look at pictures from Miami Beach right now, and it looks like it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It's like nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's very scary. And spring break is not, it used to be a week. Now it's a couple of months of rolling spring
Exactly.
breaks.
Especially in pandemic when schools don't monitor your attendance in the same way that they did in the
And
past.
where do people go on spring break? They come to Florida, they come to Texas, they come to the places that are wide open right now.
Yeah. Texas and Florida, that sounds like a great 1-2 punch in terms of COVID with our governors. Well, that is tonight's Q&A on LGBTQ, health, and pandemic. We're here every Tuesday with Dr. Howard Grossman to answer your questions. You need medical assistance, and we're LGBTQ. Of course we do. We encourage you to contact Midway Specialty Care Center with 10 locations in Florida, and especially contact Dr. Howard Grossman right here in Wilton Manors and all across South Florida. Thank you again, Howard.
Thank you, Al.
All right, well, next we have a special segment asking, is LGBTQ America a religious dumping ground? The fight over religious freedom versus LGBTQ civil rights. Queer News Tonight is proud to host a very special interview now with Pastor Jim Conrad of Kennesaw, Georgia's Townview Baptist Church, and Reverend Dr. Darrell Watkins from Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale. Townview made national news this week as Conrad and Townview decided to welcome a gay couple and their adopted children to their church services. Some members of the congregation left the church over that decision. After threats from the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant religious organization in America, Townview held firm. SBC has now removed the church as a member of the convention. Here was Pastor Jim Conrad in his message. Watch this.
One said to me, I don't want my church to be a dumping ground for those people. At first, I was offended by my church, and I could only reply, yes, it's your church, and about 200 other people call it their church. I wish I had reminded this person that it was really Christ's church. But I've been stewing on this dumping ground idea. It hurt. It angered me. It left a sour taste in my mouth and a knot in my gut. I hear again the words of Jesus when questioned by the teacher of the law, Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. A dumping ground. You know what? I won't mind it if I'm the pastor of a church that's a dumping ground for gay and lesbian people. I'll consider it an honor to be pastor of a church that becomes a dumping ground for the parents and grandparents and siblings and aunts and uncles of gay and lesbian youth. I can live with people under 30 calling us a lumping ground for loving and welcoming their friends. I'll be proud to be known as a dumping ground for straight people looking for a welcoming church. I would count it a privilege to be a dumping ground for straight people with their own brokenness, their own questions, their own stuff. In fact, a church where men and women, black and white, young and old, American and immigrant, conservative and liberal, new believers and lifelong churchgoers, and yes, straight and gay and lesbian. Some may call that a dumping ground. But friends, for me, this is holy ground.
The story of Townview and the Southern Baptist Convention is critical to the LGBTQ community. The battleground will balance religious freedom versus LGBTQ civil rights. Must one exclude the other? There's a battle coming over the passage of the Equality Act, the Biden administration's enforcement of non-discrimination policies, and the ending in the Supreme Court.
Reverend Dr. Darrell Watkins spoke to the balance of equality and religious rejection just this week at Sunshine Cathedral. Watch this.
To do. The Apostle Paul wrote, if I speak with eloquence but am not loving, my speech is really just a lot of noise. Religion is taking it on the chin lately, and not undeservedly. Because for far too long, religion has been noisy, but not noticeably loving. Religion has had a lot to say, but too much of what it has said has been cruel and unkind and unfair and unloving. And so we have choices. We can walk away from it, a lot of people have. We can attack it, some people do, or we can decide to be different, a different kind of church where we don't focus on dogma and doctrine, but instead on love, where we don't focus on differences so much, but instead on our commonality that we are all God's miracle and not God's mistake, where we don't focus on who is to be left out, but we focus on that in God's economy and God's love, no one is left out.
Well, there you have it. Joining us tonight from Townview Baptist Church in Kennesaw, Georgia, is Pastor Jim Conrad and Reverend Dr. Darrell Watkins, Senior Pastor at Sunshine Cathedral here in Fort Lauderdale. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Pastor Conrad, I want to start with you. Of course, you caught LGBTQ America's attention in this story about your acceptance of parishioners coming to your services, a gay couple with adopted children. Tell us a little bit about what happened and what your experience of what happened has been like.
It's been a pretty interesting last couple of years here in Kennesaw. The sermon clip that you heard was when I sort of laid out for our congregation the direction that I would propose that we take. And that was to say that even though there may be different understandings of human sexuality, that it would be the position of our church that anyone who could profess Jesus as Lord and be baptized upon that profession, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, would be welcomed as members of this church. It was that decision that we ultimately made to acknowledge membership that put us in the crosshairs of the Southern Baptist Convention because that was a specific action taken by the church. We could have chosen to say, well, you can come, but stay quiet. I could have said, let me help you find a church where you'll be welcomed. But I didn't feel like that was what I could do. And we as a church chose a different direction. We have since, welcomed that family and other gay and non-gender binary and transgender folks into our ship, offering them that welcome, saying to them publicly, you're a part of our family and we love you as family. And that has been a good thing for our congregation, and I believe also a good thing for these folks who are, for the most part, just looking for a community to accept them and welcome them and let them grow in their faith in Christ.
Pastor Conrad, I'm curious, when you were making this decision and you were making this presentation to your members of your church, I grew up Southern Baptist, but let's face it, your church at Townview is in Kennesaw, Georgia. You're not in Fort Lauderdale, you're not in San Francisco, you're not in West Hollywood, you're not in New York City. Did you know what you were taking on when you made this announcement? Did it digest the reactions in some circles that you would get in the religious community and other communities? Did you know what you might have faced in making this decision?
Yes and no. I knew that there would be a significant number of folks in our church who could not walk this journey with us. And when we made the decision, about a third of our membership left.
A third.
Yeah. The decision of the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee a couple of weeks ago was expected. The only news there would have been if they had decided not to take action excluding us. We're not mad at them. They made a decision and we've made a decision. And because we decided to welcome these brothers and sisters into our fellowship, the SBC has decided that we would no longer be welcome in their fellowship. You know, I was not prepared for the outpouring of support and encouragement that we have received over the last month since the news of the SBC action began to be noticed. We've heard from people all over the country, well, literally from all over the world. Folks sharing with us very personal and sometimes very painful stories of rejection by the church. Folks offering words of thanks that if there's a church in Kennesaw that would welcome them, then maybe there's a church where they are that would be able to welcome them. There was a young woman who was in the youth group of the church where I served in college, where I was ordained and where my wife and I got married, that messaged my wife. And her story is that she came out as a lesbian in college and had not been to a church service since because of the rejection that she experienced. She lives not far from us, and she said, I will be going back to church and I'll be going to Townview. So if we can offer that kind of hope, I wasn't prepared for that response.
That is, I have to say that the story is fantastic, and that's what brought you to our attention, frankly. I want to bring in Reverend Dr. Darrell Watkins. Of course, to many of you watching, Dr. Watkins, the senior pastor at Sunshine Cathedral, is no stranger. This story is likely going to be no stranger to him because Reverend Pastor Watkins does the same thing, but in the largest queer church in the world here at Sunshine Cathedral. When I'm curious, Darrell, when you heard this story at Kennesaw, what was your reaction from your seat, which is very different than Pastor Conrad's seat?
Well, my current seat is different. I'm in a very LGBT diverse and active place in the world. But I grew up in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas, and so I could have very well been someone who would have needed the sort of ministry that is being offered at Townsview. Because of who I was, I had to go. I had to leave, and college and graduate school, and that was the way out. So just sitting here, just listening to the story again and listening to his words, I'm tearing up just to think of all the people who have been, they're not even microaggressions, they're just aggressions. They have just been hurt, they have just been wounded, they have just been told that they are beyond the reach of God's love. And that there is a place now in Georgia, suburban Atlanta area, that there's one more place in the world where they will be welcomed and safe and affirmed, and where they will actually be able not to be told that they're beyond the reach of God's love, but where they'll be able to experience it. So I just think we have another hero in the world. I think we have another shining example of what it means to be the church, and I'm so glad for the people who are going to find that church in Georgia.
Yeah, Pastor Conrad, to piggyback on those observations, again, I come back to the reason why the LGBTQ community has responded so significantly to your story all over the world, as you say, is the LGBTQ community frequently is very hurt over religion. And the Southern Baptist Convention's response to you is really a response to us. It is a rejection of us because you've embraced. From your seat, what can you do to help embrace LGBTQ community for a large percentage that have walked away? Any thoughts in terms of what should be done in terms of trying to reach out and embrace the community? Because everybody doesn't get a Sunshine Cathedral. We're super lucky to have a Sunshine Cathedral, but everybody doesn't have that. Any thoughts of what can and should be done?
I think we can all do little things that have great power. My daughter, our youngest child, is 25, and she was proudly sharing with her peers what her dad had done. And one of her friends texted her back and just said, it meant so much to me simply to hear your dad say in that interview, gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual. It had not occurred to me that simply for a minister to simply acknowledge the existence of those folks in the community would have such a powerful impact on her. And she's straight, but she knows in her heart that that's how the church should be. We had recently a woman worship with us for the first time who said, "Thank you," and I just smiled and nodded and, through masks. And she said, "I haven't been able to be in church in a long time because my daughter is lesbian and I couldn't talk about my whole family in my church. Thank you for welcoming me." And so that simple act of welcome is critical. And we have a young gay partner couple that joined our church 2 weeks ago, and they said, we describe our church to our friends who, first of all, can't believe that we go to church, and that if we do, we go to a Baptist church. But we describe our church as a place where they worship, where they teach the Bible, where they serve, where they minister, where they help people, where they pray for one another, but they welcome us. And so we call it Church Plus. I thought as a pastor, I can live with that. And so we want to offer the welcome to say, don't just come in, be a part of us, be a part of our family, be a part of the family of God. We want you to use your gifts. And so we involve laypersons in worship leadership every week. And I try to make sure that we have both men and women, black and white, to lead in worship, because I know, as your folks have mentioned earlier, representation is important. And so we have had member LGBTQ folks in our congregation to lead us in worship, because they're a part of us. We don't put, a tag up, "Hi, I'm John, I'm gay." They're just a part of us. And so we want them to find and discover their gifts and use them as members of the body and of this church.
I'll remember that, because Pastor Conrad, in our community, LGBTQ plus is frequently used, and from now on, I'll pause for a moment when I say LGBTQ plus at Queer News Tonight. I'll think about the plus as it relating to church, and so it's a nice plan. We were having some picture issues. There we go. I wanted to bring Darrell back into the conversation, because one of the things that we also thought was very interesting to be able to discuss with both of you was this balance that we're at nationally, the Equality Act and its importance in the extension of civil rights and the balance of religious freedom. Both of you have similar views, but I suspect some differing views. Where can we get to, do you think? We've done the story tonight about Senator Collins and her request and requirements, what might happen on the filibuster of getting to 60 seats. President Biden saying that his absolute, besides COVID, top goal in the first 100 days is the Equality Act. Where are we going in terms of the religious, especially from the evangelical point of view, or the very rigid point of view, like the Southern Baptist Convention? Where are we going in balancing religious freedom and civil rights in communities like the LGBT? What are your thoughts? Darrell, let's start with you. What do you think?
Well, I reject, just out of hand, that there is a religious right to be unkind, that there is a religious right to be cruel or mean, to dehumanize and demonize people. So I really bristle at this attempt to protect people's right to discriminate. You don't have to ordain people that you don't want to ordain. You don't have to. There are religions that are against interfaith marriages. I mean, we all have our stuff. I know that, but when you are trying to legislate that you can reject, that you can condemn, that you can refuse services to people, that is not kind. That is not compassionate, and that. It seems like a perversion of religion that people would say, I should have the religious freedom to abuse and to harm and to denigrate other people. I just reject that that is a right, whether it's legislated or not. It's not a right. You do not have a right to be cruel.
And Pastor Conrad, what do you think about the balance of the Equality Act and how we balance that with religious freedom?
I think that in the church, change is a four-letter word, and one of the ugliest four-letter words that is ever used. And so there is a large portion of our country's population that their world has changed radically in the last 50 years. I think that fear is part of what he who shall not be named tapped into to become elected to his job. And so that fear, in my experience, I make the worst decisions when I operate out of fear. And I think we do that as churches, and I think we do that as a country. And so part of it, when you asked earlier, what can we do? It starts by getting to know people and to realize we don't have to be afraid of them. It wasn't that long ago that I could have made all the arguments for why a same-sex couple should not be allowed to adopt children, until I met my friends who had adopted 3 boys and found that they were a family. Just happened to be a family with 2 dads. And the gay lifestyle for them was 2 minivans in a suburban house, racing to get their boys to and from practices and games and church activities. That was their lifestyle. And so getting to know folks will help us get over that fear, whether it's getting to know, making a Republican friend or making a Democrat friend or making a black friend or making a gay friend. That's got to be the first step, that we can recognize that the other may not be as different as we were afraid they were.
Pastor Conrad, I'm curious if you had a message for the Southern Baptist Convention and their decision and where this story has gone, and your decision, your church's decision, your members' decision, what would you say to the Southern Baptist Convention?
Well, quite honestly, first of all, I would say thank you. Southern Baptist invested in my college education, my seminary education, and helped start our church. But I would also say, God bless you in your work, but know this: there are LGBTQ plus sons and daughters in your churches, and they will continue to hear a message of shame and less than and something less than Jesus. And some of them will walk away and never go to church again. Some of them will walk away and become a part of the alarmingly high rate of suicide among adolescent LGBTQ youth. They're in your churches. And they are children of God, created in the image of God, loved by God, just as much as any of the rest of us are. If you don't want them in your church, we'll welcome them in ours.
Absolutely. And I want to ask production if we can go to a 3-shot and bring Darrell back in. Darrell, I want to give you the final word here. This story at Townview Baptist Church in Kennesaw, Georgia, and what has happened with the Southern Baptist Convention and what Pastor Conrad has done. Do you think for the LGBTQ community, do you think we're watching the future of what is going to happen in America, or is this an aberration story?
I think it's the future for LGBTQ plus people, because it has to be. Hate just can't be sustained. Fear just can't be sustained Jesus said, "Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will refresh you." Well, the LGBTQ plus community has labored and been heavy laden for a long, long time, and eventually they will not be demonized. They will not be dehumanized. But then there's the next group, and the next group, and the next group. So yes, we're going to have it better. We are. And it is then our responsibility to see who else needs to have it better. Our loving welcome has to always be expansive.
Yeah, very well said. Pastor Conrad, we really thank you for being with us tonight. To be honest with you, growing up in Southern Baptist, I could tell you many stories that would curl your hair. Oh, wait. No, probably wouldn't happen.
Watch it now. Watch it.
But I just have a circle of friends that would say, my goodness, you had a Southern Baptist pastor on Queer News tonight. Wow, that's a soundbite all in itself. Please extend our congratulations to your church and your community in Kennesaw, Georgia. We're sitting here in Fort Lauderdale. We are damn lucky to have a Darrell Watkins, and we are damn lucky to have a Sunshine Cathedral. But we're not sitting in Kennesaw, Georgia, and we recognize that. So congratulations to you. Brave steps over the last 2 years and brave steps over the last several weeks. And the entire LGBTQ community takes note of your achievements. So thank you, Pastor Conrad, for being with us. Of course, Reverend Dr. Darrell Watkins, as always, from Sunshine Cathedral. We thank both of you for being with us tonight on Queer News Tonight.
That's today's news for the LGBTQ community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ evening news show. Is our community important to you?
Then help us by liking and subscribing, ring the bell for updates, share this news. We're the only LGBTQ television live video news in the world that is out of the closet and into the headlines. We need your support.
I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and on behalf of anchors Tony Lima and Cal Gajraj, we will see you daily and tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Good night.